everyone. So you've been really getting into economics lately, haven't you? Like diving deep into debt and how it all kind of plays out during a recession.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic for sure.
Definitely. And we found something pretty interesting for you today. It's we're going to unpack an episode of this podcast called SmartPodcast. It's actually made for people who are learning English as a second language. Yep. But they use this really funny scenario to teach all this econ vocabulary. I think it'll be pretty insightful, actually. So let's bring in our expert to kind of help break this down.
Excited to dive in. Using humor to teach complex topics is always a great approach.
Right. And this episode is all about this guy named Charlie, who is... well, let's just say he's having a bit of a tough time financially.
Okay.
And he decides to ask for help from the most unexpected source, Mr. Corleone.
Wait, like the Godfather Corleone?
Yes.
That's amazing. It plays on that whole image of him like swimming in cash, completely untouchable.
Exactly. And it makes the twist even funnier. But before we get there, the podcast does a really good job of setting the stage. They define some key terms like recession and broke for their English language learners. So they describe a recession as a period when the country's economy is struggling and everyone is making less money overall.
Yeah, and they even give some really relatable examples like people losing their jobs, cutting back on spending, watching the stock market plummet. It's a good reminder that a recession isn't just some abstract economic concept. It has real consequences for people's lives.
Yeah. It's like that ripple effect, right? It touches everyone from everyday folks to huge businesses.
Exactly.
And that kind of brings us to the definition of broke, which they keep pretty simple, like straightforward, simply having no money.
Right.
Which makes Charlie's predicament even more relatable. He's lost his job, and they list out all these debts, piling up credit card bills, a mortgage, even his son's college tuition. It just paints this really vivid picture of financial strain. And you can feel his desperation when he approaches Mr. Corleone hoping for a loan. He even says the recession has hit him pretty hard, which the podcast points out is a common way to express, just how bad things are going.
Right.
But here's where the whole scenario takes this hilarious turn. Mr. Corleone, the guy you'd expect to, lending money left and right, replies, "What? At a time like this, I'm broke too."
That is so funny because it totally flips our expectations.
Yeah.
We assume someone like him would be immune to economic downturns.
Yeah.
But the podcast is cleverly highlighting that even the wealthiest can feel the pinch during a recession.
Absolutely. And he even tells Charlie, "You're not the only one hit by the recession. I lost half my money in the stock market crash. Go on, get out." It really emphasizes that sense of shared struggle.
It's a great comedic moment, but it also kind of opens the door for a deeper conversation about just how interconnected everything is in the global economy. Like the decisions of governments, businesses, even individuals, it can all have far-reaching consequences. This idea of interconnectedness is something that you've been studying in economics, right?
Yes, absolutely. And this skit really brings it to life. It's not just theoretical. These economic forces impact everyone.
Right.
Okay, so after that hilarious exchange, the Smart Podcast episode goes to its language takeaways section.
Okay.
And they focus on those key terms you talked about: loan, mortgage, hit me pretty hard, and
tuition.
It's interesting how they present those terms for English language learners, but honestly, those definitions are actually helpful reminders for anyone, even someone like you who's been digging deeper into economic theory.
For sure. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in all those complex models and jargon, but sometimes going back to the basics can give you a fresh perspective. It's like looking at a familiar landscape from a different angle.
Absolutely.
And right after that basic vocabulary section, they do something really interesting. They bring up this idea of cultural differences in how people view debt.
Okay.
So they compare North America, where having good credit is like essential, to Switzerland, where debt is often seen as something to just avoid at all costs.
Yeah, I found that part really fascinating. They said in Switzerland, you actually have to put money into a bank before you can even get a credit card.
It's such a different mindset, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really highlights how cultural values and historical context can shape entire economic systems.
It really does.
And it makes you wonder how those different attitudes towards debt, if they might influence economic behavior on a larger scale, like, for example, in a culture where debt is more accepted. Maybe people are more likely to invest in businesses or, make those big purchases that could actually fuel economic growth.
Yeah, that's a good point. But couldn't it also lead to higher levels of personal debt, though?
Oh, absolutely. And potentially more financial instability.
Like a double-edged sword.
Right.
I remember reading somewhere that countries that have higher levels of household debt, they tend to actually experience deeper and longer recessions.
Exactly, because when people are already like burdened with all this debt,
Yeah.
they have way less flexibility to kind of weather those economic shocks.
Right.
They might have to cut back on spending even more drastically during a recession, which can further slow down the economy.
It's that downward spiral.
Exactly.
And then on the flip side, in a culture that's more like averse to debt, you might see slower economic growth, but potentially more stability and resilience during tough times.
Right. And, this difference in cultural attitudes can also influence things like government policies and financial regulations.
Oh, yeah.
For example, a country with a higher tolerance for debt might have much looser lending standards, while a country with a more cautious approach to debt might have way stricter regulations to try and prevent excessive borrowing.
Yeah, it's like a whole different set of rules for the economic game.
Exactly.
And it really makes you realize that economics isn't just about the numbers and formulas. It's so deeply intertwined with culture and psychology.
Oh, for sure.
Speaking of different ways of using language, though, the SmartPodcast episode has this section called Fluency Builder, where they break down some common English phrases. They highlight things like, what can I do for you? And I'm really sorry to trouble you. And even on top of all that,
those phrases might seem simple, but they're actually packed with these subtle cultural nuances, and learning how to use them correctly can be so helpful for someone navigating a new language and culture, especially in more formal settings.
it's like those phrases are shortcuts to sounding more natural and confident in conversations.
Absolutely. And they can be particularly useful in situations like, say, applying for a loan, which ties back nicely to the theme of the episode.
It's all coming full circle. So before we wrap up our deep dive into this SmartPodcast episode, they end on this classic piece of financial advice.
Okay.
Be smart with your money. Don't be in debt unless you absolutely have to.
It's simple advice, but it's so timeless, especially when we're talking about, the potential for recessions and economic uncertainty. It's always wise to be mindful of your spending habits and, try to avoid taking on any unnecessary debt.
I love how they frame it in the podcast, though. It's almost like they're saying, hey, even if Mr. Corleone can feel the pressure of a recession, it's a good reminder for all of us to be careful. It just adds that little humor to a serious topic.
It definitely makes it more memorable. But, beyond the humor, this episode really does do a fantastic job of kind of illustrating some pretty fundamental economic concepts and sparking curiosity about, those deeper issues.
I agree. And they managed to do it all in a way that's engaging and entertaining, even for someone like me who's already been studying economics.
It's a reminder that learning can happen anywhere, even in the most unexpected places.
So as we kind of reach the end of our deep dive here, what stands out to you as the most insightful takeaway from the SmartPodcast episode? What really sparked your thinking?
I think for me, it's that link between cultural attitudes towards debt and how those attitudes can really shape economic outcomes. It's something we often overlook, but it can have a huge impact on everything from, personal financial decisions to national economic policies.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's like that whole conversation about debt isn't just about numbers. It's a reflection of these deeper cultural values and beliefs.
Exactly. Think about it in a culture that values thrift and financial independence. People might be way more inclined to save money, even if interest rates are low.
It's like they're playing the long game, right? Prioritizing stability and security over quick profits.
Exactly. And that can lead to a much more resilient economy in the long run, one that's, less susceptible to those boom and bust cycles.
No.
But it also raises the question, could that same aversion to debt sometimes hinder innovation and entrepreneurship?
That's a great question, because taking on debt is often necessary to start a business or invest in new ideas.
Right.
It's like there's this constant tension between playing it safe and taking risks.
Absolutely. And finding that balance is key, both on a personal level and a national level.
So for those of you listening, as you continue to kind of explore economics, keep this idea in mind. How do cultural attitudes towards debt shape the choices we make, not just as individuals, but as entire societies?
It's a question worth pondering, especially as you delve deeper into the complexities of recessions, economic growth, the global financial system.
Well said. This SmartPodcast episode may have been designed for English language learners, but I think it offered some really valuable insights for all of us.
I completely agree. It's a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected sources can spark these fascinating discussions and really deepen our understanding of the world.
So keep those ears open, stay curious, and until our next deep dive, happy learning.